Welcome to the Herberger Online Office Hours podcast for the summer of 2020. This is where we bring together faculty and instructional designers to talk about an article, a video, a podcast episode in the area of online teaching and course design. This week, we're taking a look at episode 308 of Bonnie Stachowiak's Teaching in Higher Education, EdTech's role in helping students feel engaged, safe, and productive with Professor Ryan Straight. So I know that sounded a little bit too formal, but it's supposed to be an informal chat. So feel free to interrupt, ask your questions. If you're on video, raise your hand. I've also prepared a document here. Let me share the link in the Zoom chat where you can feel free to add your own thoughts. I know I was talking with someone else earlier, most people don't feel comfortable writing on someone else's document. When I start these documents, it's just a framework for everyone to participate. So feel free to treat it that way. There's a place for Q&A if you want to put your questions there. One of the things I don't like about Zoom chat is that it goes away once the meeting is done, unless you save it. But so let's go ahead and just try to get in the practice of putting our questions into the document. And that way that can save as a resource after the fact if someone's watching the recording or if they just come across our document to learn from the questions that we had. Welcome, Dawn.
Thank you. I couldn't tell if I was muted or not.
No, you're on. So I wrote down on this document a couple of the main topics that I felt were important in this podcast episode. So we can use that as a framework or go from there. It doesn't matter to me. What were some of the main ideas that stood out to you, any of you, from listening to this interview with Bonnie and Ryan?
Sorry, trying to find my way back to Zoom and my mute for my phone. I really, first of all, I come from corporate training. So I agreed with his take that our LMS isn't really utilized like an LMS is. It's more like a repository for information than a tracking system ongoing. So I thought that was pretty well thoughtful and thought out and articulated. But I also like the idea that this is just changing the composition of how we utilize technology and how we interact with our students in the classroom in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I that's one of the places that I know that Bonnie is very listening to her. I've been listening to her podcast for several years now. And she is very kind of anti-LMS. She has a lot of ideas about teaching outside the LMS, and it's a kind of a thread that runs through some of her materials. But I often wonder if that sentiment comes from not using the LMS well enough, or not knowing its capabilities. Not that Bonnie wouldn't, but sometimes I wonder, and sometimes I have a conversation with faculty members and they say, well, I can't do this in Canvas, so I need another tool. And it's something that they could do in Canvas if they thought about it a little bit differently or just knew all the features of Canvas. So I come back to that conversation every once in a while of just how important it is to really know our LMS, because it is the backbone of what we're offering. I like to look at the LMS or any kind of class website as the thing that ties everything else together. So if you're using external tools like YellowDig or Flipgrid or other things like that, they do all tie back into the LMS because that's where students are starting. What are some of your thoughts about that, Karen?
Well, when we had Blackboard, I had learned all the workarounds I needed. And then when we switched, I found the interface really different. And since I have not grown up with tech, like every student that we have, and many of you, I find it difficult to navigate. Mm-hmm. I think it could be easier if they would take just some people who aren't techies and they could have a roundtable discussion and really talk about how can we make this easier. Mm-hmm. So But I kind of agree that learning doesn't have to be all about the LMS.
Mhm.
And a good LMS should facilitate learning, and I'm not sure this does.
Yeah. And one of the misconceptions that we often face working with new online faculty is that idea that all the work has to be done in the LMS, when really the LMS is more a conduit for communication, right? And especially in Herberger Online or in HIDA, where we have music and dance courses and theater courses, you know, a lot of the times we have a very successful piano class that runs online. The students don't do, you know, the assessment for oftentimes for that piano class is that they need to sit at a piano and record them playing something and then submit that recording as evidence of that they've worked on this study or this exercise. So a lot of the times people don't realize that the activity, the learning activity, or even the assessment can be outside the LMS, captured in some way and then delivered back to it. It doesn't have to be, not everything has to be a quiz or a discussion board or, you know, some kind of, you know, flashcards or something that's on the computer. The activity can be away from the computer and we bring it back to it to deliver to the instructor. Don, how do you see the LMS being used in your situation?
So I have to be like the student that didn't prepare for this. I saw you posted on Facebook and I had a block on my calendar. So I went ahead and showed up and I wanted to support because I think this is a fabulous idea and I hope to contribute more in the future. But
That's
I
great.
am the Canvas admin at our college and the instructional designer. So I come from that aspect of it. And what you're saying is something I try to help our faculty find is other, like you said, other ways to do it and just use the LMS to submit it. And I think now that so many classes had to go remote so suddenly that minds are being expanded and we're finding creative ways to do that. So,
That's
so
great.
thank you for letting me come in and I'll try.
I do think that of all the LMSs that I've used, I enjoy Canvas the most. I think it's the most flexible, and I do think it's aptly named that it is a blank canvas. It's you can make it what you want. You can use the tools. You can organize things in modules if you choose to. You can structure your modules in different ways that make the most sense for your class and your materials. And I like that you can have that kind of flexibility there. But oftentimes that flexibility is hard for people to visualize what their structure should look like. So that's something that I often work with faculty is you decide how you want your structure to be, and let's make the LMS fit to your learning objectives and your needs. Let's move on to this idea about engaging students. And a couple of these topics that came up in the podcast are very similar here about feeling engaged and being engaged. Also the idea of presence and being a person. I think that's one of the things that's hugely important in online is how do we be present? How do we be there for our students and how do we be a person? What are some of the ways or some of the challenges that you've seen in that area?
I don't think I've had a lot of those challenges because I have a totally different idea of how to educate, especially since I am an internship coordinator in Edson and not like teaching English or math or anything like that. I am a disruptive innovator. I'll freely admit it. I'm always thinking out of the box and I'm always trying to figure out, now, how can we do this better? And I start out with the idea that the student and I are going to learn from each other. And it's a totally level playing field. I want them to call me Karen, not Professor Unterschutz. That's way too many words. And I believe that building the relationship and showing some vulnerability on your part really engages the student right from the beginning. because I'm talking to these students early on, trying to figure out where an internship is going to be a good placement for them. But I think that kind of breaks down the barriers early. And I haven't had anybody abuse anything. They've got my cell phone from the beginning. I figure if they've got a death in their family, they need to call me and let me know so I can pick up the pieces on this end. So I guess I am not a real structured educator in that regards. I was an art major first and an education major, and then went off, and I've been a nurse for 40 years. So maybe I'm just trying to break out of the structure of nursing.
But I do like that idea that you approach it a little bit differently. And you said something just now that they also said in the interview of talking with your students rather than talking to your students. And if we establish this idea from the very beginning that we're all here together to work together to get through a thing, that's a very different idea than you're here to learn from me, so sit down and listen. And those are just very different ways of engaging people. Those are very different ways of approaching a subject matter. And it's interesting, I often say, make the comparison. When I started teaching as a brand new teacher out of undergrad, I started, my first teaching job was middle school. And being a younger guy, you know, my professors told me you have to establish this professional distance. You're not there to be your friends, to be their friend. You're not there to, you know, chat casually. You're not there to be their big brother, or, you know, you're there to be their teacher. So you make sure that you dress appropriately, and you're creating this professional distance is what they called it. And that was important at that time, especially as when I then went on to teach high school, and you know, the age gap between myself and my students wasn't so great. When I started teaching graduate school, often my students were older than me, and that was a little bit of a different dynamic as well. But when we started teaching online, it's almost like that whole dynamic has to flip upside down, and we have to work hard to reduce the distance between us. We reduce the professional distance. Because there's already plenty of distance. Bonnie uses the phrase transactional distance a lot. And there's already physical distance, transactional distance, technological distance. There's already too much distance between us all already. So it's really important to proactively make ourselves more of a person. I hate to say less professional, but more personal, by using different techniques, emotional language, like, hey, I'm glad you're here, using words like we and us rather than you, and things like that, to really show and be a person that has flaws and that has problems and that has struggles, because our online students are people that have flaws and struggles as well. And if we can establish that idea that we're here together to do a thing, then that we find, and research shows, that students are more successful in that environment and more engaged in that environment. Don, how do you see that working in yours?
Sorry, I had to find my Zoom room. Engagement is something that we're talking about a lot, because, to be honest, we went through our accreditation, and it's an area that we have to improve. And so I agree with a lot of the things you said, and how to implement them, and to find ways to connect with our students online. I apologize. I kind of wasn't planning to speak up, so I was just sitting here not formulating my thoughts. That's and fine. More listening to you.
That's fine. Mary, what do you think?
Oh, I think engagement's key, right? You have to make the students feel like you care about them, for them to want to care about what you want to tell them. Karen, I really like that you don't have them call you professor, and that you have them call you by your first name. That's like low-hanging fruit, right? To build relationships and to make them feel like they're part of something instead of being talked down to. So I think that's great. I love the idea of engaging them in the knowledge that they already possess. So having those discussion boards where you have them express their thoughts and feelings are really important, rather than having them reiterate what others have said in the learning materials. They might make fusions to what has been said and then relating them to their own environment and how they feel. But I think that's a really important thing, is to kind of focus on the emotional value of their learning as well.
They brought up this idea of being present and being there for your student doesn't mean that you need to be on all the time, or that the student needs to be on all the time. And I know that when online learning first started, and when some of these online communication tools first started becoming more prevalent, especially or even in the K-12 arena, there became this concern that if students, if I'm online, does that mean that students, like Karen, you mentioned that they have your cell number, they can call or text you. Does that mean that you have to be available and on teacher mode 24/7 because they have that ability to reach you at all times? And I know that is one thing that some instructors struggle with, of dealing with that idea that if they message me or if they email me, or I feel like I'm never off duty. How have you dealt with that?
Not well. I do feel like I work all the time, but I'm getting better at setting up boundaries, because I know I have to have some life out of ASU. But it seems when we went online and I had to reformat all the internships to provide hours for them, it really took a lot of time. Mm-hmm. And then knowing that we're going to be online throughout the summer now, I have really gone after projects with different organizations, like the state of Arizona, the head of the board, the executive director of the board that does the oversight over DOs, osteopathic doctors in the state. Okay. And I've got a compliance student working with him on projects for the summer. So what I am trying to do is be able to change the internships so I can handle all of our Starbucks scholars that are out there, that we've got Uber scholars, we have people all over the country. I am so happy we are inclusive and diverse, because we have to set the table with diverse people in order to move change forward. And I think that it's really important that where was I going with that? I feel like you, Dawn. What were we talking about?
About being on all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so I am now setting some time off for myself. I am going to take weekends off after I get everything done, to get everything up early, because they start on Monday already. But I have been talking to them for the last 3 weeks. And one thing that I am concerned about, that I think we need to deal with, and I hope we have a lobbyist at the financial aid people in DC, and we go in February and we start lobbying. But my course is not covered by financial aid. It is for Starbucks and it is for military, but for most of the kids who are getting financial aid, and that's many with our diversity policy, which I love, but we need to make it a year-long financial aid package. People are not going to school the way I did when I was in school. It's no longer fall and spring. It's 28-year-olds with 2 kids trying to get through their college education to get into that job that will provide the family with more money. And I feel strongly that we are just it costs the kids $1,500 to take my course in the summer, because it's a 3-credit internship course. And that just infuriates me. And I did call the financial aid office, and they said, oh, well, we're the government and we can't do anything like that. And I thought, okay, I won't call you anymore. Because you are not willing to think about what we need to provide our students, since we are taking this kind of approach to education. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to touch on that if that's okay, and kind of like a merging of the two things you were talking about, Karen. So boundary setting and
Uh-huh.
showing students we care and setting an example for them. So, you know, when it comes to engagement and wanting to be there for them all the time, it's not healthy for you, right? And it also shows them that that would be a potential expectation for them, which is not healthy for them. So it's like, you know, creating those boundaries and then expressing the boundaries. So setting expectations and then exceeding them. It creates a good customer experience, right? And our students are our customers. So I think it's important to, one, set boundaries because it sets a good example so that when they move into these different spaces, they know how to set boundaries too. And expressing why you set those boundaries, you know, having them understand that it's important to have diversity of experiences, which also means having time with your family or having time for your hobbies, and maybe even expressing what those hobbies are that you're doing when you're not calling them back or emailing them back. It helps build connection, and it just helps set the right tone for them in a professional way. And I think it really prepares them in a really good way to enter this oversaturated world. I think I'm definitely a culprit as well. I'm on social media far too often. I definitely don't set boundaries with work, especially now working from home. It's like I don't leave the office ever, so I'm never really feeling like I'm offline. And it's just not healthy. So I feel you there.
You're right.
But you pointed out some really good things. I just wanted to kind of co-sign on that.
And I actually can jump in on this one. I was paying attention and I wrote notes so I won't lose myself. But no, setting boundaries is super important. And right now in my role, I support 800 faculty. And so as you can imagine, they have issues that come up on the weekends as they're trying to shift to a remote instruction. And so I've tried to be an example in that I will address things, but I also do it in defined periods of times. Part of what I try to express to them is to be flexible. It's no longer a Monday through Friday 8 to 5 option. You expressed, Karen, that you have students that might be working or have children and all that. So as a faculty member, sometimes we have to decide, okay, maybe I prefer 8 to 5 Monday through Friday, but I need to have an evening option or a couple of evening options, and then expressing that. So throughout the course, we ask that they put how you can contact them and what your expectation of a response time is going to be. You know, like you can email me and that's my preferred method of contact, and I'm going to respond within 24 hours or 48 hours or whatever that's going to be. And then look for opportunities to have open office hours or something on some little off times. And then going along with that, it's the due dates. You know, like if we make everything due Sunday at midnight, you should probably have some time on Sunday for those people that are going to be in panic mode. So maybe you adjust your due dates on your items to reflect the time that you're going to be able to be present and available. So
Yeah. No, I like some of those points that you brought up. The idea of flexibility, because that's why students often will take an online course, is because they need that flexibility in their schedule. But also the idea of not only setting the boundaries, but making them very clear and about your response time. That because communication is one of the challenges of online learning. When they're in your classroom, they can raise their hand, they can ask a question and get a response in seconds. If there's confusion about an assignment or something you said, if there's that same confusion about what you said in an online class, now they have to go write an email and then wait, maybe hours or days for a response. And so that's obviously a challenge that needs to be designed into online courses. That's one of the reasons that course design is such a higher priority in online than in traditional in-person courses, because it needs to be planned out. If there's misunderstandings, they're harder to adjust. But what you said about knowing when to expect a response, and that's just so big for online students, because you can just imagine them sitting at their computer thinking, I sent this email an hour ago and I haven't heard anything back yet. Did she get it? Is she mad at me? Am I stupid for not, asking this question in the first place? You can just kind of imagine all the self-doubt or all the questioning that student might be going through. Whereas if they know, she doesn't answer emails after 5 on on Thursdays anyway. So, or she answers emails every morning from 9 to 11, or, whatever the pattern is. If they know that, they don't have to be worried. They don't have to be apprehensive. Now, if 9 through 11 passes and they haven't heard back, now they can worry and move that. But having that expectation of when I should expect a response really takes that pressure off of, okay, I sent the message, the ball's in her court now. I don't have to worry about it until this time or until I hear back. And I think that's really valuable, of just kind of alleviating that pressure. Let's talk about discussion boards. That's a big one that always comes up for people that are new to online. You could tell that Ryan and Bonnie had some specific opinions about discussion boards. They brought up this idea that discussion boards are not natural, that we don't talk like that. Let's just open it up and say, what are your experiences or thoughts about discussion boards?
They're often misused. I think that it's really hard to think about how you can create a organic conversation when you come from a mind of assessment.
Mm-hmm.
I really dislike the post once, respond twice, make sure you cite your references. It just makes it so sterile. And
Yeah.
I think it shuts students down, right? And I wish that discussion boards were more about their feelings, so emotional, and really connected to how the students felt about the information that they've consumed and how it relates to their world. And it might not even be the faculty's world, right? So it could be very, very small community-based reflections on how it affects them. Those would be more interesting conversations to me. And I think it makes students want to learn and want to seek out additional information. So discussion boards are awesome when done correctly. They're often not done correctly.
Amen.
I agree. I actually got my degree online, so I've seen the good, the bad, the ugly.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciated discussion boards where, like Mary said, it drew upon personal experience. So whenever you can take the topic and apply it to your life and share an experience that was more helpful. And then I also like it when it was something a little bit different, and so like some of the things we've brainstormed on ways to do it is maybe one of your discussions is to create a meme about the topic or to do a video response, just kind of finding a different way instead of the typical must be so many words, must reply to 2 people. And we do need a way to assess it and to grade it, but again, that word flexibility comes to mind. So
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I'm not fond of them, as you can imagine. What I have done instead is we have weekly reflections, and I'm the only one who sees them. So I can respond to whatever questions or feelings or whatever aha moments they had during the week. One thing we are doing is we are teaching real skills on their weekly assignments, because as we all know, the workforce has said they don't have the correct skills to go into the workforce and be a contributing member right away. And part of that's because they're still kids, and for the most part, and it takes a while for them to get involved and engaged and everything else. But what I like to do is do one module about failure. Because failing forward and failing often when you are innovating and when you are trying to change things and make things better is just one of those things that you will have in your lifetime. So I asked them to share with me a time that they failed and how did they feel about it. And I have gotten the most incredible reflections from that. They know I'm the only one who's going to read them. And so they kind of lay bare their hearts, and it just has been such a great experience with the discussions we have one-on-one afterwards. So.
Yeah, I like that idea that failure is not a bad thing, because we all learn from failure, and that's how we move forward. I once heard a speaker talking about a fail-safe environment, and we often think of that word fail-safe meaning that there are things put in place to keep you from failing. But his point was that this is an environment where it's safe to fail. And that was an interesting way of thinking about that. And when it comes to course design, developing intentionally places where it is safe to fail, because that's where the learning happens. If everything goes right the first time, you didn't learn anything. You just demonstrated that you already had an ability, or that you got lucky, or whatever. But when you fail and have to reconsider and retool and try again, and then you do better, that's evidence of learning. And so, some might argue that there is no learning without failure, but building that into the course and building that into those formative activities and chances to explore ideas without such concern that any wrong step is going to hurt my grade or things like that are incredibly valuable.
Yeah, it's unfortunate we seem to be so grade focused all the time. I mean, especially in Edson with the nursing people. I have so many nurse wannabes in my class, and that's because they did not make the grade point. And when I think back on my years in nursing, I think I don't necessarily want a 4.0 nurse. I want somebody who has compassion and empathy and all the skills that nurses are supposed to bring to the bedside with the patients. So, yeah, and I've seen the stress level rise in these students because of the grade situation. And they still want to be nurses after they graduate. So they go back and now they're going into a master's level degree that they can get in. They've already got their bachelor's degree, and they go immediately to a BSN and then to a master's degree when they graduate. So it's a great program that I think is really going to help these students.
Yeah.
Because they'll have a great background in compliance or whatever.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to the idea of kind of bringing it back to the tool of the discussion boards, separating the use of a tool from the tool itself. And to kind of echo some of the things that Mary said about it can be used really poorly. And I think that's, if there's any fundamental flaw of a discussion board, it's how easy it is to use it wrong, right? When we design things, if your car was designed so that it was really easy to drive it wrong, that would be a bad car, right? But I feel like discussion boards can be incredible, but somehow early on in online learning, we came up with this expectation that, like Mary alluded to, that you should post by a certain date and then respond to your peers by another date, and that you would get points for each of those interactions. And I don't know where that came from, but major historical moments aside, if I could go back in time and fix that, I would. Because when we hold a discussion in class, we don't ever have the expectation that, okay, all 40 of you are going to say something unique and then turn to 3 people and say something else to them about what they said. That would just never happen. Or if it did, it would take 5 hours, right? If we had the patience to sit and listen to every 40 comments, and then, it's ridiculous. But for some reason that expectation got adopted and hard. It got adopted hard, right? And it still carries on of this. It's amazing when I talk to instructors, they think that's what a discussion board has to be. And so just changing our expectations and changing the policies and the expectations that we're placing on the students. I really encourage faculty to only use a discussion board when there's some value in the response you're going to get from your peer. And if there's not, then why make a discussion board? It's just an assignment, right? If it's just, like you said, Karen, a reflection that only you're going to see, then that is an assignment that gets submitted to you. There's no, and I'm not saying that you did make this as a discussion board. I'm just saying that's a good example of something that shouldn't be a discussion board.
Mhm.
If only you, and the value is coming from you. And that's why I think sometimes we get this sense that it's just transactional, and we get this sense from students that it's just busy work, because there's really no value coming from the peer in a lot of these cases, where we just get comments like, yeah, I agree with that, or good job, or you're right, you know. And so
Yeah, I can.
focusing on discussion board prompts where, like you said, it is about what's your opinion on this, or how does this apply in your situation, or places where they really can benefit from feedback from their peers, and then not necessarily placing an expectation that you do give feedback, but just if you feel like you have an answer for one of your peers, give it to them, and then it can be much more organic because we're not placing artificial expectations on it. Mary, you had something there.
Well, and I think that you could make a discussion space just for the idea that you want everybody to read each other's reflections, because there's some
Mm-hmm.
connection there, right? To see if they have like the same kind of thought process or application, or how these
Mm-hmm.
different ideas can be applied in different spaces. I think there's value there, but I agree, like, don't make them respond to each other. And in fact, if you
Right.
want them to interact with that, make them do a separate assignment where they have to write a reflection after reading all of their peers' posts. So they can just have a one-sided, here's what I think reflection, everybody dump it in the same space, called the discussion
Mm-hmm.
board, because that's just how the discussion board works. Everyone has access
Right.
to it. And have a separate activity, like a graded survey. It's automatically graded. They just have to turn in their reflection about what they thought about their peers' reflections and thoughts, and how it, you know, intersected with their own. Those are viable reasons to use a discussion board, but still not use that formula.
I like it. Yeah.
I have a question, and because I agree with so much of what Mary was saying, but how do you then incorporate the student-to-student interaction?
Well, I think it depends. So you can do a discussion board where there's like information sharing, right? That's a really good student-to-student connection. So we use tools like Yellowdig for that, because then there's auto grading to it. You don't necessarily need to read everything they're saying to one another. You just want to make sure they're talking to one another and sharing information. And we have a lot of those in like treasure hunt activities. So there'll be a general theme or concept, and then the students are asked to go out and find relevant current events or historical events out on the internet that they can, or even in the library, right? Electronic resources. And then post those links so that other students can look at it, and then, you know, come back and let them know what you thought about what they posted. Is this something you could potentially use in your own research? Is this something that you found interesting? Do you have other questions for them as to why they thought this would be relevant? And that will start to get some of those organic conversations going. But I think it really starts in the very beginning, in their introductions. I think you can kind of frame how these interactions occur when you start very low-hanging fruit activities at the very beginning of the course, and just encouraging them in like a course overview video and announcements to go in and read their peers' thoughts. Feel free to respond back if you feel compelled to do so, right? And then also modeling it, not overly so, because there's a lot of research that shows when faculty are too involved in a discussion board, it actually makes students disengage. But just kind of model for them, maybe in 1 or 2 posts, how you would interact or how you would expect them to interact, and kind of model that behavior for them.
And I think it comes back to that idea of being a person. That like you said, Mary, if you start the course that way with some introduction boards, and they start engaging each other as people first, that they're going to feel much more comfortable engaging each other in a domain specific idea later, because they've engaged as a person first.
Yeah, I love introduction activities that are like games. So I love 2 truths and a lie. So each person has to, you know, say who they are, and then they tell you 2 truths about themselves and they say a lie. And then your job in response is to tell them what you think the lie is. So, you know, that's kind of fun. And then they want to come back because they want to figure out, well, was I right? What's this person all about, right? And so that kind of starts that dynamic, and now they're making connections into personal experiences that aren't even related to the course, and they're making it more fun to just kind of return back, and just getting them into that habit, right? The mechanisms of returning back once they've done something is a good social tool.
I use that same discussion in our training course, and it is super fun. It's a great way to get to know people. I did one time too that was something about, I can't remember how I did it, but was pizza toppings. I can't remember if you put your favorite pizza toppings or something like that. It was fun too.
Another technique that I like to use, Dawn, to encourage that peer-to-peer interaction is when we want to build a discussion board that is really this kind of peer back and forth. One of the things we find is that it's that third response that's hard to get to, right? The student can respond to a prompt, and sometimes you can get a meaningful peer response, but getting to that third point where it actually becomes a discussion, where it becomes a conversation, is the challenge. And so what I will often do is build prompts or build an expectation where the peer's job is to ask a follow-up question. So I've provided a prompt, a student provides their response to the prompt, like, what did you think about this thing that they said in the article, or, you know, that kind of thing. And then the peer's job is not to reply to their response, but to then ask them a follow-up question, like, did you really mean this, or did you mean that, or can you explain more, or, you know, so that the peer reply is a question, and then now there needs to be a further response, and then that student is actually gaining, because of their peer's question, they're being forced to think deeper or take the next step in their mind of clarifying their thought, or being challenged in their thought, or something like that. And so it really helps it to get real value from that peer response, but also helps it to get over that third interaction step. And I've seen that used really well.
Thank you both. Those are all great ideas.
Mm-hmm. So
I think
Mary,
the last,
you teach. Sorry.
that's good.
Hi. I actually don't teach anymore. I'm all instructional designer all the time. But previously I worked at an auto insurance company for their training department and helped them move all of their in-person training courses online and make them more active. So that's where I taught for 4 years, was in the corporate training world.
Wonderful. So you're, Dawn, you too are a curriculum designer, correct?
Yeah, I'm an instructional design technology specialist, so it's like a little hat that they threw everything in. I am the only one, so you get me for all things. And then I do teach a non-credit class at an adult school.
Oh, cool.
Nice.
Very cool. Well, I hadn't heard of that, 2 truths and a lie, so I'm going to try that.
Excellent. I actually heard that from Greg Broberg. He uses it in his courses. He's an instructor over at the School for Social Transformation. But we've used it in like icebreakers for corporate meetings. So
sure.
Yeah.
That's great.
So maybe the last topic we'll look at today is the idea of building community. I think that's one of the things as we have a lot of new programs moving to remote, temporarily or to online. In the long run, how do you continue to build community around your courses and among your students when they're at a distance?
I am in my master's program, we used Twitter. So he didn't necessarily design a Twitter account. He just designed a Twitter hashtag that was the name of the course and then the session that it was running in. And it was unique because for some reason, no other colleges were using that. So it was easy to kind of coalesce in that one space with that one hashtag. So that's an idea. Yellow Dig also can be used over the course of a program. It doesn't have to be just for one course. So you can continue using a board. And I would actually recommend not using it necessarily as the course assessment tool, but just as a general meeting space within the program, or Facebook groups. You know, there's different ways to stay connected, and social media is making it easier and easier for us to do that.
Yeah, and it might vary too, based on, you know, the I don't know a better way to say this, the kind of student you have. Mary is an instructional designer for ASU online. So the courses that she's designing for and the students that are in them are almost completely 100% online students, online degree seeking students. Where I often will also build courses that are at ASU called I courses, which are immersive online courses for the local student population, that sometimes can also be offered in Mary's division. And Karen, you're working with students that are local and often that you see them physically, right?
Yes, yeah.
when COVID isn't in place. But so we're kind of, and I don't know, Dawn, you probably deal with some combination of all of those things. So community can have different needs in those different environments for sure.
And the students that I'm working with, we are trying to build out our internship program to our like Starbucks students and other students that are online, because they should be able to have the same kind of experience. And if I can figure out how to do internships online really, really well, it'll be just such a better thing for all of our students online. So
yeah, we work in a global world, right?
Yes,
so it's like
exactly.
teaching them how to communicate that way is so critical.
Yeah.
Oh, and I didn't mention Slack. I should have. That's like the bread and butter now of ASU, and that's a really good space for social interaction.
Mm-hmm.
How
are you seeing, Mary, how are you seeing Slack being used in classes? Are you seeing some good course integration yet?
Some of them. I mean, there's just early adopters, like our GIT program. Technology does not scare them. They like trying out new things. Some of them already were using Slack before it became university-wide. But it's a slow move. I feel like we could have done potentially a different way of onboarding all faculty and staff to Slack, just to kind of get them used to the system before then introducing it as a potential classroom tool, kind of flipped the way that we did that. But I think slowly people are understanding that one way is it's the place you can get help immediately, right? So if you know the right Slack channels and you post a question, within a minute you have an answer. So that's very different than a UTO help desk experience. So I think that's a good draw for people. Yeah, it's slow.
Yeah, and for those of you that maybe don't know what Slack is like a separate chat platform. So it's like a real-time chat, but you can have different channels and different subgroups of people. You can also do direct messages like Twitter, but it's a very robust chat platform where you can embed documents, videos, pictures, lots of
different
fun
softwares,
little response emojis, different plugins and things like that too. I'm really liking with the Zoom integration. I can just type a short code into a Slack channel and it'll create a Zoom invitation and send it out to all the people in that channel. So it is helping to serve the need of some of that closer to real-time communication than something like a discussion board or an email does.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's nice because you can share information very easily. So files, images, YouTube videos, they auto embed. So it's just a really dynamic space to be sharing information. It's far more dynamic than a discussion board. The unfortunate part is that it lives outside of Canvas. So they do have a few steps to get into the system. It takes a little bit of onboarding to get them used to using it. But once and I'm talking just a very little bit of onboarding, right? Wouldn't that be your opinion too, Tim? It's pretty easy to use once you've oriented
The nice
yourself.
thing about it is you can start using it at a very low level very easily. And then over time, you start to realize, oh, there's a lot more here than I realized before. I know I used Slack probably for about a year. Before then, I started realizing, I think I'd like to go get some actual training in this. I want to go, I started searching more YouTube videos and we have a Slack training course available internally. But yeah, I mean, I used it as a chat client, to drop photos or drop files to my coworkers. But then you start realizing that there's a lot more depth to it as well. I had a faculty member the other day ask me, well, how do I grade what they do in Slack? And so my first answer was, you don't. right? I mean, it's because that's not what it's for. I mean, there's no
Right.
pass back to Canvas. There's no automatic, counting how many interactions they had and things like that. But the more I thought about it, the more I kind of thought that's probably a good thing. I mean, it helps it to be that, for lack of a better word, that safe space, that place where I can just ask questions and I can just chat with my friends and I can, post something that I found on YouTube that I thought was relevant to class, and it's not an assignment. It automatically makes everything that's there not an assignment, and makes it more organic. And that's one of the things that I like about it, and probably something that we need to work to embrace more in our courses is non-graded interactions. This idea that not everything we do has to be scored and graded and affect our potential employment someday.
Totally. Have you used the workflow builder yet? That was
I
something I'm
have.
really interested in exploring. Oh, you have? I want to get together with you offline and get some
I've only
info
done
on how
very
you've done
simple
it.
things. I built a welcome message to my channel so that when I
Good.
add
That's what I want
faculty
to
to my
do.
faculty support channel, because I've been added to channels before that, so I've been at ASU 2 years now. And as I get more established, I get looped into more projects and things like that. And so you get added into channels and you just get dropped into this flow of conversation that's happened for a year, right? And you have no idea what people are talking about, or, sometimes I don't even know why I was added to this channel or who added me. And so I wanted faculty to have a different experience when they were added to my channel. So anytime someone's added, it sends them a notification that says, you've been added to this channel. This channel is about this. And the reason that you're here is this. It's very simple as far as, but the workflow builder is a little bit like an automation tool. And
Yeah,
so
I want
it's
to
kind
use
of
it for
fun.
masterclass. I think it'd be a good
Mm-hmm.
thing to use there, as we have lots
Yeah.
of faculty being dropped in, and give them an experience where we don't have to monitor it, every moment of the day. That's one thing I can say about Slack. Slack overload is a thing.
Right.
There can be so much communication that happens in that space that it can be overwhelming at times.
It's been great in the last couple of months for sharing resources. But I've also had to learn how to mute channels. I don't need a notification every time someone shares another resource all day.
Boundaries.
Yeah. So that's just
Boundaries.
one of those foundational skills of teaching and interacting online is knowing when to shut it off, knowing when to create that barrier and when to use it.
So I mentioned as an online student, some of my things that helped me the most in my role is that I was an online student and got my degree that way. And some of the things that helped build community for me were Facebook groups related to the major. And so that was at a university, whereas I work at a community college. So it's a little different for us. But I'm still friends with people that I met on the Facebook group, and we made professional connections, and we've been able to point to each other on career paths and everything. So that was super helpful. And then as on a course by course basis, we did have some courses that also had Facebook groups, and one of them was on social media. So that of course lended itself well to being done in a group on Facebook. Right. But as much as I hated it as a student, group work is where the key was. And that's where I really made connections to other students. And again, some lifelong friendships, even though we never met face to face. I did end up meeting one of them face to face. They came out and were great friends. And so that's really where I built that community, is in those really difficult spaces of doing group projects. Right. But honestly, the connections were there more than any place else. So
that's great. And I'm glad you said that, because like you said, students often don't enjoy the being forced to do that group work. And as a designer, I often try to figure out, is that because they don't like interacting with each other, or we just make it too difficult to interact with each other, or, there's too much ambiguity in these group assignments where one person ends up doing more work than another, or things like that. And I always try to approach that from a design perspective of, can I fix that? Or is that just how things are?
I think it's human nature, unfortunately, you know, and it happens, but it's reflective of the real world and working in the real world. And you're going to work on committees and you're going to work in groups where people do not follow through. And so you learn good skills of how to work with each other and try to draw out, you know, build some leadership skills if you end up being that person that is spearheading the group. But and I meant to mention, we also use Slack in some of my classes, but it was more student driven. It wasn't university driven. So just somebody would know Slack and they'd say, hey, let's use Slack. And we were using Hangouts and different things like that. But again, that was because of group work. So you had a group that had to get something accomplished and they found a tool that would work for that communication.
Good mention too, because it is one of those tools that's used in industry. So, you know, this is one of the things where they might take some time learning how to do it now. And now that's a skill they're going to have moving into the private sector as well.
Yeah, and that's one of the, and the fact that it's outside the LMS, I think just reinforces that it is it's not a task. It's just a natural interaction. Ryan in the podcast mentioned that idea about specifically teaching tools that would be valuable to them when they left the school. Sometimes I worry about getting too tool specific sometimes in courses rather than concept specific. If we teach them to interact, you know, because the tools come and go. 5 years ago, there was no Slack and there was no Zoom, you know, that would just, if we're too tool specific, we don't have flexibility. But if we are establishing these expectations that community is easy and, you know, there's always tools coming and going to establish that, then that's incredibly valuable. And you're right, when they leave school, they're not going to have Canvas at their workplace. They're going to have Slack, they're going to have Microsoft Teams, they're going to have Zoom, they're going to have whatever is the next 5 things that come along. And so just knowing the kinds of interactions that are potential and the value that comes from that is the main thing. Well, I want to honor everyone's time as I see here that we're getting close to 2 o'clock. And I want to thank you all for coming and having this conversation with me.
I enjoyed it. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for creating a space, Tim.
Yeah,
Thank you for
I hope
the
to see
invite.
some of you back. Yeah, and I wanted to follow up with Dawn is here because I posted this in a Facebook group, and that's cool. You know, an instructional design Facebook group that we've probably gained lots of value from, and I think groups are probably the best thing about Facebook right now, because you can connect with people around a central idea and a central topic, and meet with people that you wouldn't normally have come across in the physical world. So that's awesome.
Agreed. Love that pandemic instructors group. If you haven't joined it, find it.
Oh, I haven't seen that one.
It's a good one. There's a lot of K through
Excellent.
12 instructors in there too, but there's a lot of good sharing happening there. All right, nice to talk to you all. See you later.
And hopefully we'll see some of you back next week.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.